Hey, what's up? I'm Channel Pup Fanboy Supervillain. And in anticipation of the release of the upcoming Sonic X Shadow Generations, I have decided to rank all 18 stages of the original Sonic Generations. And I'm definitely not expecting this ranking to change at all when Sonic X Shadow Generations comes out, because that's not really where the changes are going to be. It's much more an expansion of the original game, and they're not going to be touching the level design, right? I mean, I don't think so. Subscribe if you haven't already, and if you want to support me further, the link to my Patreon is in the description below. All support is greatly appreciated. Without further ado, let's get on to number 18. Planet Wisp Act 2. Now, this stage does have its defenders, and I'm gonna say out of the gate, this isn't even a bad stage. In fact, I wouldn't say there are any bad stages in Sonic Generations, but this is my least favorite. There's honestly some pretty cool ideas going on here in how they've integrated the overall design of Planet Wisp into the overall mechanics and functions of this stage. And it definitely demonstrates an understanding of what made the original Planet Wisp great. That journey from this lush green paradise into this mechanical dystopia, showing us the extent of Dr. Robotnik's industrialization of this otherwise beautiful planet. The stage begins brilliantly. Everything before you get to the factory is some amazing 3D platforming, and the stage feels so open-ended, full of branching paths for you to kind of blaze your own trails. Excellent, that is everything a Sonic stage should be. But once you get to the factory, things become a lot more confined. And yes, that's by design, but it does also hurt the enjoyability of this level, as the remainder of it is pretty much entirely 2D side-scrolling gameplay, with a brief break for a quick-step section. Yeah, the enjoyability of this level kind of drops off of a cliff, with the stage pertaining to more stop-and-go based platforming. I also think the choice of Wisp here wasn't the best. It's the Rocket Wisp, and the thing with the Rocket Wisp is it does stop your speed and flow state dead every time you use it. And it's not even like you're using it to solve any particular puzzles or anything like that. No, you are told when to use it. And because this isn't something that requires any skill, it ends up feeling more just like, okay, we're stopping the game dead for a few seconds while we see Sonic turn into a rocket. It's a shame because this stage does present some interesting new ideas, but it's held back by an over-reliance on 2D side-scrolling gameplay, stop-and-go platforming, and also it just doesn't feel very fitting as the final stage. It's not even that difficult. It means that the main gameplay portion of Sonic Generations kind of ends on a whimper. In at number 17 is Chemical Plant Act 1. Again, not a bad stage, it's just non-existent. I tend to forget that this one even exists. There's not really anything wrong with Chemical Plant Act 1, but there's not really anything it does that's special either. It's just a neat little representation of Chemical Plant represented through 3D graphics. But it doesn't really have anything new to say about Chemical Plant. We're not really exploring any new areas here. There's not really a new twist. The layout starts off very similar to the original Chemical Plant stage, but then later on kind of remixes things a little bit, but again, it doesn't really do anything new with this. Just kind of condenses a few parts, changes the order of a few bits. It's a lot less challenging than the original Chemical Plant was. And I mean, I think the best thing about that original Chemical Plant was those long stretches where you could just really build up your speed and take advantage of that, rolling down the pipes. Chemical Plant Act 1 in Sonic Generations doesn't really have that luxury because A, the stage is very condensed, and B, the rolling physics just aren't there in this one. Meaning that you really don't get the most out of Chemical Plant this time. The best thing about this is just how creative they get with the camera angles when Sonic is rolling through these tubes, but other than that, it's a nothing burger. In at number 16 is Planet Wisp Act 1. Once again, there's a great understanding of what made the original Planet Wisp work, in that we start off in the more natural landscape of the untapped Planet Wisp, and then head into the factory. Now, fortunately for classic Sonic, his stages are only ever obligated to be 2D side-scrolling gameplay, so that's not something I can hold against it here. And what goes on inside the factory is at least a little bit more interesting this time. It's a lot more puzzle-based, with different cogs and turnstiles opening up different pathways. This does mean that the pacing of this stage is once again a little on the sluggish side, but I do at least appreciate that they were trying something new here, and I think the choice of Wisp this time was a lot better, being the pink Spike Wisp. I won't lie though, giving the Wisp that gives Sonic the spin dash to a Sonic that already has the spin dash feels just slightly redundant. But it's alright, this one. This is an okay stage. I tend to play this one last. I tend to play this one after Act 2 instead, simply because there's more of a sense of finality to it. Even in the music as well, it feels more like a final level. It's a little bit more climactic, especially with these missiles going off at the end. In at number 15 is Chemical Plant Act 2. Naturally, this is much more exciting than Chemical Plant Act 1, because I think a big part of Sonic Generations' appeal for me, when I was a kid anyway, was seeing what were previously pixel art 2D stages brought to life in fully 3D gameplay. I can fully immerse myself in these environments as I kind of always dreamt they'd look. And Chemical Plant Act 2 allows me that with a very explosive stage. Like, the chemical plant is going nuclear here. The music is also quite a drastic reinvention of that original Chemical Plant theme, taking on a decidedly slower tempo, which I thought was a really cool choice. So, why is it so low down? And this is probably going to become a trend among the weaker modern Sonic stages in this game. But this stage is ultimately a 2D stage bookended by two 3D sections. But the majority of this one is that 2D side-scrolling gameplay, which I just don't see the appeal for when we have classic Sonic. Not to mention, I've already played this stage in 2D gameplay back in Sonic 2, so I don't know why I need this element here at all, let alone in the modern stages. It just seems like a lot of missed potential. The contents of the side-scrolling sections in this stage are fine though. There's a little bit of stop-and-go platforming here and there, but it never loses sight of the speed that makes Chemical Plant great. It's just a shame to me that we brought a 2D stage back in a 3D game and spent most of the time in 2D. Especially when this is supposed to be our 3D representation. In at number 14 is Sky Sanctuary Act 1. Now, this is actually a really good, really well-designed stage. It feels very vast. And it's also cool how we got a very different context here to the original Sky Sanctuary back in Sonic 3 and Knuckles, where that was your home stretcher on the way to the Death Egg. This time we're just kind of taking a leisurely stroll through it, and we get to appreciate the tranquility of it, and that's reflected in the music as well. There are sadly no boss fights against Mecha Sonic Mark II, and I think that would have been nice for one of the challenge gates. Would have been like a Mecha Sonic boss rush. But I appreciate that here we at least have a reinvention of what Sky Sanctuary was. We've even got some new gimmicks introduced here as well, such as the spinning tops from Marble Garden. This one gets points just for how transformative it is, and the only reason it's as low down as this on this list is simply because I liked all the others better. But make no mistake, this is a really good stage. In at number 13 is Seaside Hill Act 1, taking the spot of our resident water stage, which I think was an inspired choice because you are always going to have that kind of trouble of differentiating Seaside Hill from Green Hill, considering Seaside Hill is basically a reinvention of Green Hill. Fortunately, we spend most of our time in the many temples of Seaside Hill, and making this a water stage was a really smart move. As far as water stages go, it is not giving Hydro City a run for its money, but a lot of the hallmarks that you would expect from a water stage are here. Currents that drag you through, little poles that you get to hold on to. The things you would expect are all here. I'd say if it takes cues from any water stage in Sonic history, it would be kind of more Labyrinth Zone. In that you do have quite a bit of surprise spike beds and stuff like that, but at the same time, it's nowhere near as big or as vast as Labyrinth Zone. As far as water stages go, this one is quite shallow. And I think for a game of this pace, that's probably for the best. In at number 12 is Green Hill Act 2. And as an introductory stage to Sonic Generations' modern gameplay style, this is just about everything you could ask for and does a pretty good job at setting the tone. It's a rip-roaring roller coaster ride through Green Hill Zone. And the majority of it is in 3D, and there is a good sense of world building to this as we kind of travel through a cave, we look at the more overground areas, more underground areas, and it just feels like a very, very lively take on Green Hill Zone. We've even got a fun set piece here with this giant piranha, and it gives us a little taste of the hallmarks of a modern Sonic stage, such as rail grinding, for example. The only thing I will say is that as an introductory stage for the game, it is very speed-focused, with very little engaging platforming here. Which is a shame, because when the game hit its strides with the 3D platforming, it really hit. But sadly, Green Hill Act 2 does just end up being more of a racetrack than anything else. More an introductory spectacle than anything truly engaging to play, and that's a shame. I kinda just wish we had like another Green Hill Act that was maybe more on the level of Sky Sanctuary or Seaside Hill Act 2. But we'll get to those in due course. Next up at number 11 is Green Hill Act 1, which is the introduction to the game. You're not given a choice as to the order of which you want to play the Green Hill Acts. As soon as you boot it up, you're starting off at Green Hill Zone Act 1. And this stage looks breathtaking visually. It's a lot less visual stimulant than Act 2 ends up being, and I think in some ways that's for the best. It's a much more calm stage, and it feels like a real ecosystem. And we've got some new gimmicks and new ideas in there. We've got a little tease of 3D stuff as the camera kind of goes over classic Sonic's shoulder. We've got falling bridges, we've got an underground cave, and we've got the integration of the corkscrew from Sonic 2's Emerald Hill here, and it feels bigger and more exciting than ever before. This was a really cool reinvention of Green Hill Zone, and a great way to start Sonic Generations. I have no real complaints here. This one's only as low as it is because of preferences. In at number 10 is Crisis City Act 1. This stage has such a sense of scope to it. Everything feels massive. And there's something so cool about seeing classic Sonic fighting demons and monsters instead of the usual badniks. The scenery is very lively and reactive, there's a lot going on screen. They do some really cool stuff with the tornado, by which I mean an actual tornado, and not Tails' biplane, in how it kind of sweeps through the level, it drags the goal plate away from you, kind of teasing you. I remember back in 2011, we referred to that as trolling the player. They got really inventive with this one, and while there is some stop-and-go platforming towards the end, it does at least feel kind of earned. In at number 9 is Crisis City Act 2. This one has some incredible platforming and level design, and it feels incredibly rewarding to pull this stuff off at a high speed. There's lots of alternate branching paths. It's everything you'd want a 3D Sonic level to be. The stakes are high. You've got all that very reactive animated scenery that you've got from Act 1, and they even kind of rework the Mach Speed section into a quick step section. It just feels that much more quick, fast-paced, and exhilarating. My only complaint about this is I do think the lava stomping in the 2D section gets old pretty quickly. After a while, it's like, okay, here's a lava platform, better stomp on that. It becomes routine and mundane. I think it needed to better refresh itself in this section. Aside from that, though, this is an incredible stage. In at number 8 is Speed Highway Act 1, and this is much more kind of what I wanted from Chemical Plant Act 1, in that it's a lot more slopey, and while rolling physics aren't really a thing, spin dashing down these slopes feels really, really good. There's lots of spectacle with the different rockets and cranes, and this is, it's just a very high spectacle classic Sonic stage. It feels like classic Sonic has entered the world of modern Sonic, and that's exactly what this is. Again, there's some really great world building here as well, with how you go through these different buildings. Some of them are like multi-story car parks, some of them are like hotels. It really feels like we're taking a real journey through a real city. It really achieves that feeling of being this larger-than-life skate park. Everything feels massive. The ramps, the hills, the slopes. And with that, you can get a huge amount of airtime. This is a great stage. In at number 7 is Speed Highway Act 2. Speed Highway Act 2 is basically the original Speed Highway, really brought to life with a much more kinetic playstyle. Sonic absolutely zooms through this stage. He tears it apart. And there's a great deal of satisfaction to that. Pair that with the excellent world building of Act 1 with the indoor sections, and you've got an improved version of the Speed Highway stage. Now, yes, I did criticize Green Hill Act 1 for being very racetrack-centric, but this one gets a little more interesting as it utilizes much more of like the drift functionality. If you don't use that drift, you're going to be playing this stage like an idiot. But the best part is how many alternate pathways there are and how hidden some of these are. All these years later, and I'm still finding new areas in this stage. Now, I remember when I was younger being a little disappointed that this didn't have the daytime section at the end of the stage that the original did. But something that is a nice touch, and I don't know if this is just me, but it does appear that the sun is rising at the end of this stage, which I think is really cool. So yeah, Speed Highway Act 2, great stage. In at number 6 is City Escape Act 1. And I could see why they went so hard on this game's marketing with this stage right here. For one, seeing classic Sonic running through urban San Francisco is insane. San Francisco is such a cool environment for Sonic. He just looks right at home there. But then there's the scope of this level. It feels huge, and it feels like a very interactive world. Something I like here is that Act 1 explores different parts of San Francisco to Act 2. Act 1 focusing much more on the rooftops rather than the streets. It truly is a rooftop run. Oh, wait a minute. Even how platforming elements have been made to look like construction scaffolds as well. But then something I really appreciated about Sonic Generations is as we enter the modern era with classic Sonic, his stages become a lot more spectacle-based as well. You've got the skateboard power-up, which is very difficult to use, but if you play skillfully, it can be incredibly rewarding, as this thing can go faster than Sonic himself. And then there's the gun truck, which is not only there for a cool set piece, it actively tears the stage apart behind you, so it introduces more of a kind of a timed stake aspect to the stage. The remix of Escape from the City is great, it really works well for classic Sonic. Overall, yeah, City Escape Act 1, I can fully see why they chose to lead the marketing with this one. In at number 5 is Rooftop Run Act 1. Rooftop Run Act 1 is awesome. We spend quite a bit of this stage outside of the Spagonia University. We've got lots of little references to Sonic Unleashed with the different national flags. And there are some really interesting platforming sections inside this, what I assume is a winery, as we've got these falling kegs. And then the best part is the clock tower ascent, where you're climbing up the clock tower of Spagonia. You hang off of the clock hands, and then you rev the clock face up to a point where it springs off, smacks into a miniature version of the flying battery, run through that and destroy it. Oh, it's awesome. It's such a cool set piece. Marking Rooftop Run Act 1 as my favorite of the classic stages in this game. They are all modern stages from here. In at number 4 is Rooftop Run Act 2. Rooftop Run Act 2 is very similar to the original stage that it is based on, given that this is basically the exact same gameplay style in the same overall environment. The difference here is that the stage is shorter, but it's a bit more tightly packed than the original was, feeling a bit less racetracky and a bit more lived in. There's a little more of an emphasis on the 3D platforming side of things. I love that the second half of the stage is mostly downhill. It feels very satisfying. And there's just little bits of set dressing here that just make this level feel that bit more lively than its Sonic Unleashed counterpart, that being the confetti and the hot air balloons. But then there's sort of like a mini-boss at the end of the stage. You've got that long quick step section where you are hurling different badniks into those little jetpack badniks. But once you've defeated them, you see another miniature flying battery which you hurl more egg fighters into. And once you defeat that, it spits rings out at you, which is awesome. It's shorter than the original stage, but at the same time, it feels like there's a bit more packed into that short duration. I feel like a balance between the two would be the best version of Rooftop Run, but at the same time, I would probably call this the superior version. In at number 3 is City Escape Act 2. Now, I'm just gonna get the elephant out of the room. This is nobody's favorite cover of City Escape. If this is your favorite version of the song, please do feel free to comment below and let me know I'm wrong, but this pales in comparison to the original. Everything else here is great. The streetboarding section feels even quicker and more satisfying with this zippier Sonic gameplay style, with, you know, the accentuation of the drift and also the boost. We've now got gun robots in the street as well while you're snowboarding down those streets, so that's really interesting. You can grind on the power lines now. But my favorite parts of this stage are just like where it opens up a little bit, like where you've got this park here. There's lots to explore. And then of course you've got the chase with the gun truck at the end, which is a tiny bit more challenging than the original. See, in the original you could just outrun that thing easily. Now it has these saw blades, so you have to quick step away from the saw blades. Basically like the mini bosses from Sonic Unleashed. And that gun truck chase gets kind of ridiculous, as this thing can now go on rooftops, it can now move along the sides of buildings. The spectacle has just been dialed up to 11. I won't lie, my favorite version of this stage remains the Sonic Adventure 2 original, but this version here is awesome. In at number 2 is Sky Sanctuary Act 2, which is just a masterclass in 3D platforming. This stage feels huge, there's so many different paths you can take, so much to discover. That paired with the aesthetic of Sky Sanctuary makes for a really mysterious level. There's such a bright atmosphere to this one as well. But I think this was the first time we'd really had such a platform-centric stage with this Boost Sonic gameplay style without it constantly switching to 2D. There is still some 2D in there, but it's very sparing, which is so appreciated. Yeah, we did have platforming sections in, say, Sonic Unleashed in 3D, such as the revolving platforms in Dragon Road, but this is the first time like the entire stage has felt so heavily platformer-centric. It's one that you kind of want to be sparing of your boost while you're playing, and I really appreciate that. There is just so much to explore here, and so many cool ways that they change the platforming up, whether it is just the hovering platforms or the bouncy clouds. But also, while it is heavily platforming focused, it also does allow you to get that speed as well. This is a fantastic stage, which would any other day of the week be number one were it not for the number one stage on this list. So in first place we have Seaside Hill Act 2. Now, as a kid, my little monkey brain did not want this to be my favorite stage in Sonic Generations because Seaside Hill has already, by the time Sonic Generations released, been thoroughly represented in different racing games and spin-offs. We'd seen HD recreations of Seaside Hill before, so it was probably the stage I was least excited to see. That, and of all the games represented in Sonic Generations, Sonic Heroes is not the worst of the bunch, but it was probably my least favorite of the bunch, the one I have the least strong feelings for. But holy crap, I can't deny this stage is amazing. With this stage, they really cracked the code with going fast in a platformer-centric level, and that is just to make the platforms massive. And suitably, yeah, the stage feels absolutely massive. Tons of alternate branching paths, excellent world building as we go from the outer lush paradise of Seaside Hill into the temples. So many little hidden areas. There are even parts of the level design that you can only reach if you're moving at your top speed, which means that skillful play is rewarded. You're even given a choice as to whether or not you want to do a more conventional Sonic platforming section, or if you want to jump into the race cart. You've got little underwater sections. You have orca whales. This stage is just that perfect marriage of high-speed action and platforming. They really knocked it out of the park with this one, and that's why it is the best stage in Sonic Generations. But what do you guys think? Comment your rankings below. And as always, if you enjoyed this video and you want to support more like it, be sure to hit subscribe, hit the like button, and in the description below is the link to my Patreon page, where for as little as $1 a month, you can get your name in the credits of these videos, with a special shout out going to the patrons in the $5 and above tiers. They are Cho Henshin, KB, RT0, Cal-X, Hypes, Sad Goku, Dare Denny, SSS06, Kale Bennett, Ken K. Good news, everyone! They found helium in the Iron Range. Your long search is over. Cirrus the Skeptic, Biotin. Oh no, I've used up all the helium. What am I meant to do now? And Vera Wild. Thank you, good folks, so much for your generosity, and to all of you at home, thank you so much for watching, and have a great day. Now get out of here.